Welcome to the deep dive. You know we love to get our hands dirty around here, and today we're talking about something pretty down to earth, literally enhancing organic matter in your soil.
That's right. We're diving deep into cover crops for all seasons from the Virginia Association for Biological Farming.
And we're going to break down how different cover crops can boost that organic matter.
Yeah. It's like having a toolbox full of different options, and we're going to figure out which ones work best for you.
I love that analogy, a toolbox for your soil. Now, this isn't just about knowing the names of cover crops.
Right. It's about understanding what they do for the ecosystem underneath.
Okay, so right off the bat, the document highlights these three big factors that affect organic matter.
Tillage, biomass, and erosion. Those are the big three.
And cover crops step in to take on all three.
Exactly. Cover crops protect the soil, add organic matter, and we can till less, which is better for soil structure.
It's like they're multitasking superheroes for our soil.
I like that. And there's a lot of talk about how organic farming relies too much on tillage.
Yeah. But this shows how cover crops can address that criticism.
For sure. It's like a more holistic way to manage weeds without harming the soil.
So cover crops are good for organic practices.
Yeah, they can really make a difference. Now, the document mentions this idea of a cover crop toolbox, which I really like.
I like that too. It shows how many options we have, right?
Absolutely. And that's what makes this topic so interesting. So many cover crops, each with its own pros and cons.
Yeah. So many choices. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with the basics, the foundation of any good soil building plan. Winter cover crops.
Okay, winter cover crops. And I know one of the stars of the show is winter rye.
Ah, yes. Winter rye. It's super popular and for good reason.
It's known for biomass suppressing weeds and holding on to nitrogen, right?
You got it. But here's the thing. While it's great at storing nitrogen over winter,
Okay.
it can actually tie up nitrogen in the spring, making it harder for your cash crops to get it at first.
Oh, interesting. So it's like delayed gratification with the nitrogen?
You could say that timing is key. You have to let the rye decompose a bit before planting those nitrogen-hungry veggies.
Gotcha. So planning ahead is essential. And speaking of timing, the document also mentions something called allelopathic effects.
Right, allelopathy.
Now, hold on a second. Allelopathic. What does that even mean?
It means that rye releases chemicals that can stop other plants from growing nearby.
Oh, so it's like a natural weed killer.
Yeah. But you have to be careful because it can affect your crops, too.
So you need to be strategic about when you plant and incorporate rye.
Absolutely. Now, the document also mentions wheat and triticale.
Okay, wheat and triticale.
They're similar to rye, but they mature a bit slower.
So a little more laid back, but still valuable.
Exactly. And then there's barley. Have you heard about that one?
Yeah, I think I read something about it being good for certain types of soil.
Yeah. Barley's great for lighter soils, those sandy ones, and it can handle drier conditions, too.
So we've got rye, wheat, and triticale for heavier soils, and barley for the lighter, drier ones.
You got it. We're
Yeah.
building our cover crop arsenal.
I love it. Okay, so what's next?
Well, let's talk about a cover crop that's a superstar when it comes to soil structure. Annual ryegrass.
Annual ryegrass.
Tell me more.
It has these dense roots that create a network in the soil, improves drainage, aeration, you name it.
Wow. So it's like it's giving the soil a makeover.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it produces a ton of biomass, too.
Amazing. But are there any downsides?
Just one thing to keep in mind. Annual ryegrass is a little tougher to get rid of.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can't just mow it down.
Yeah.
You'll need to till it to really incorporate it back into the soil.
So a bit more effort, but the payoff in terms of soil structure sounds worth it.
Totally. Now, are you ready to talk about nitrogen fixers?
Oh, yeah. Those are like the celebrities of the cover crop world.
They are.
Yeah.
They have this amazing ability to convert nitrogen from the air into a form plants can use.
It's like magic.
It is pretty amazing. And one of the best nitrogen fixers is hairy vetch.
Hairy vetch. I've heard that name before. It loves cooler regions, and it can fix a ton of nitrogen. Your soil will be thanking you.
Less need for fertilizers, too, right?
Exactly. Now, the document talks about something called bicultures. Have you heard of those?
Bicultures? Not really. Fill me in.
Basically, it's planting two cover crops together to get the best of both worlds.
So like a dynamic duo for your soil.
You got it. It's all about synergy.
I'm intrigued. What kind of combos work well?
A classic one is hairy vetch with a cereal grain like rye, barley, or oats.
Okay, so Vex brings the nitrogen, and the cereal grain helps with biomass and weeds.
Exactly. It's a win-win. Now, another legume that often comes up is crimson clover.
Crimson clover. That one sounds familiar.
It's a popular choice, especially in milder climates.
Okay.
It's known for its beautiful blooms, it fixes nitrogen, and it can suppress weeds.
Sounds like a triple threat.
It is, but it might not fix quite as much nitrogen as hairy vetch.
So it's a trade-off. Beautiful flowers and decent nitrogen, but maybe not as much as vetch.
Right. It all depends on what you're looking for. Now, another nitrogen fixer worth mentioning is Austrian winter peas.
Austrian winter peas. Those sound interesting.
They're great for biomass and nitrogen, but they like to climb. You might need to give them some support.
Like a trellis or something.
Exactly. It helps them reach their full potential.
Makes sense. Now, I noticed the document mentions a whole bunch of other legumes. Spring oats, bell beans, fava beans even.
Those can be great options too. Each one has its own advantages and might be better for certain situations.
Wow. It's like we have a whole pantry of cover crops to choose from.
I know, right? And speaking of exciting choices, let's move on to the powerhouses. These cover crops are in a league of their own.
Okay, the powerhouses. Now, I'm really interested. What makes them so special?
Well, one that comes to mind is daikon radish.
Daikon radish. Okay, I'm listening.
It has these incredibly long taproots that can break through compacted soil.
Hold on. So they're like little bulldozers for the soil.
That's a great way to put it. They create pathways for air and water to move freely.
So they're aerating the soil from the inside out.
And that's not all. They can also scavenge nitrogen from deep down, preventing it from leaching away.
Okay, so deep-rooted dynamos and nitrogen scavengers. That's pretty impressive. Any downsides?
Just one thing, daikon radish is a brassica, so you need to rotate your crops.
To avoid pests and diseases, right?
Exactly. You don't want to plant other brassicas like cabbage or broccoli after daikon radish.
Right. Got to keep things balanced. So what other powerhouse cover crops should we know about?
We can't forget about buckwheat. It grows fast, suppresses weeds, and attracts pollinators.
Wow. Sounds like a winner.
It is. And then there's Sudan grass and sorghum Sudan hybrids. These are the biomass kings.
Biomass kings. Tell me more.
They grow tall, they suppress weeds like champs, and they can even help break up compacted soil.
So they're like the heavy lifters of the cover crop world.
You could say that, but they do require a bit more management.
Oh, interesting. What kind of management?
You need to mow them or incorporate them before they get too big and out of control.
Okay, so a bit more hands-on, but the benefits sound worth it.
Totally. Now, what about summer cover crops?
Summer cover crops.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some good options for those hot months?
Well, millets are known for handling heat and drought like champs.
Millets. Interesting.
There are a bunch of different types. You just need to find the right one for your climate and your schedule.
So like choosing the perfect summer outfit for your soil.
Exactly. And then there's cowpeas. They're gaining popularity.
Cowpeas. I've heard of those, but not as cover crops.
They're awesome. They fix nitrogen and you get edible beans too.
Wait, so you're telling me they're a 2-for-1 deal?
Yep. Plus, they're pretty resistant to pests and deer, which is always a bonus.
Okay, I'm sold. What about soybeans? Are they ever used as a summer cover crop?
They can be, but they're not as tough as cowpeas. They can struggle with drought and pests.
So cowpeas are the way to go for a resilient summer cover crop.
I'd say so. And there are a couple of other experimental options like sun hemp and lablab bean.
Ooh, experimental. I love it.
But we need more research to really understand them. Now, what about the long game?
The long game. You mean cover crops that stick around for a while?
Exactly. Biennials and perennials, they're the MVPs of long-term soil improvement.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Take yellow sweet clover, for example. It's a biennial with deep roots that can break through hardpan and make phosphorus more available.
Wow, so it's like a long-term investment in soil health.
Exactly. And then there are perennial clovers. They act as living mulches, fixing nitrogen and giving beneficial insects a place to hang out.
It's amazing how these cover crops create this whole ecosystem in the soil.
It is. Speaking of powerhouses, what about alfalfa? Have you heard of that one?
Alfalfa. Yeah, isn't it a nitrogen-fixing superstar?
It is. It's incredible at converting nitrogen from the air, and it can handle drought, too.
So it's like the ultimate multitasker.
Pretty much. But it does need fertile soil to really thrive.
So it's a bit of a diva, but the results sound worth it.
For sure. Now, what about mixing things up? Can you combine different perennial cover crops?
That's a great question. I was just thinking about that.
Absolutely. Creating a diverse mix is one of the most interesting things you can do.
Okay, so instead of just one cover crop, we're talking about a whole team of them working together.
Exactly. Each cover crop has different roots, nutrient needs, and ways of interacting with the soil.
So it's like creating a balanced and harmonious community down there.
That's a great way to put it. And let's not forget the benefits above ground. A diverse mix attracts beneficial insects, pollinators, all sorts of wildlife.
Wow, so it's not just about the soil. It's about the whole ecosystem.
Precisely. It all comes back to that idea of interconnectedness, and that's a key takeaway from the document. Choosing cover crop mixes that match your goals and your land.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all
You
solution.
got it. You need to consider your soil type, climate, and what you plan to grow.
So it's like designing a custom blend of cover crops.
And the possibilities are endless. Each mix has its own unique benefits.
This is all so inspiring. I'm starting to see cover crops as architects of the landscape.
I love that. They're essential for a healthy and thriving ecosystem.
Okay, my head is spinning with all this amazing information.
Hmm.
We've covered so much ground already, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
You're right, there's always more to learn. But I think this gives you a great foundation for understanding how cover crops can transform your soil and make your garden or farm more sustainable and abundant.
I completely agree. But let's take a breather and let all of this sink in.
Welcome back. Ready to keep digging into the world of cover crops.
Absolutely. My brain is still buzzing from all that info about different cover crop options. But I want to go back to something we touched on earlier. Nitrogen fixation.
Nitrogen fixation, the superpower of legumes.
That sounds almost magical to me. Can you break down how it actually works?
Sure, it's all about teamwork, a partnership between certain plants, mostly legumes, and bacteria that live in their roots.
Okay, so legumes and bacteria working together.
These bacteria have this amazing ability to take nitrogen from the air, which plants can't use directly, and transform it into something they can absorb.
So they're like tiny nitrogen chefs whipping up a plant-friendly meal.
I love that analogy. And get this, these bacteria live in special little nodules on the roots.
Root nodules, I've never seen those.
They're like tiny bumps on the roots. But they're essential for this whole nitrogen conversion process.
So it's like a whole miniature world happening underground. And when the legume decomposes, all that nitrogen goes back into the soil.
Exactly. It's a beautiful cycle of giving back and enriching the soil. That's why legumes are so valuable in a cover crop plan.
It's like they're paying it forward for the next generation of plants. Now, the document talks a lot about matching cover crops to your soil type.
Right. That's crucial.
Yeah.
Different cover crops have different preferences.
So it's like finding the right plant for the right job.
Exactly. If you have heavy clay soil that's compacted, you might want something with deep roots.
Like daikon radish or sweet clover.
You got it. Those deep roots act like natural tillers, breaking up that dense soil and improving drainage.
Much gentler than using heavy machinery, for sure.
And if you have sandy soil, which can be dry and lose nutrients easily, you'll want cover crops that help hold on to water and build organic matter.
Something like annual ryegrass with its dense root system.
You nailed it. It's all about understanding your soil and choosing cover crops that address its specific needs.
I'm starting to feel like a soil detective.
That's the spirit. Now, here's a question for you. Do you think there are any downsides to using cover crops?
That's a good question. I guess too much of anything can be a bad thing.
Right. You're on the right track. One potential challenge is that some cover crops can take a while to break down, especially those that produce a ton of biomass.
Like Sudan grass. We talked about that one earlier.
Exactly. If it doesn't decompose quickly enough, you might end up with a layer of plant material on top of the soil.
Would that be a problem?
It could be. It might make it harder for your cash crops to sprout or compete for nutrients.
So timing is key again. You need to make sure the cover crop is incorporated or broken down at the right time.
Absolutely. That might involve mowing rolling or using a special tool called a roller crimper to terminate the cover crop before it gets too big.
So cover cropping is more than just planting and forgetting. You really have to pay attention and adjust your strategy as you go.
You got it. It's a dynamic process.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of timing, when's the best time to plant cover crops?
Yeah. Does it depend on the type of cover crop?
It definitely does. And the climate, too. For something like winter rye, which thrives in colder regions, you want to plant it in the fall.
After the main crops are done for the season.
Exactly. That gives the rye a chance to get established before winter sets in.
So it's like a cozy blanket for the soil, protecting it from the cold and keeping those nutrients tucked in.
I like that. And it helps prevent erosion and suppress weeds, too.
What about summer cover crops? When do those go in?
Typically after your spring crops are done or during those fallow periods when the soil would otherwise be bare.
So they're providing some much-needed shade and protection during those scorching summer months.
Exactly. Now let's talk about cover crop mixes. The document highlights those as a really interesting option.
Cover crop mixes, I was wondering about that. What's the advantage of mixing them?
Well, instead of just one cover crop, you have a whole team working together.
So it's like building a diverse community in the soil.
Exactly. Each cover crop brings something different to the table. Different root depths, nutrient needs, and ways of interacting with the soil.
It's like creating a balanced ecosystem right there in your garden.
And don't forget the above-ground benefits. A mix of cover crops can attract beneficial insects, pollinators, all sorts of good stuff.
So it's a win-win for the soil and the ecosystem above ground.
Right. It all comes back to that interconnectedness. And that's why it's so important to choose a cover crop mix that aligns with your goals and the needs of your land.
So you really have to think about what you want to achieve and tailor the mix accordingly.
Exactly. For example, if you want to boost nitrogen, you might include clover or vetch. If you want to break up compacted soil, you might add daikon radish.
It's like designing a custom blend of cover crops to achieve specific outcomes.
And the possibilities are endless. Each mix can bring its own unique benefits.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see cover crops as these incredible ecosystem
They
engineers.
really are. They play a vital role in creating a healthy and resilient landscape.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring the amazing world of cover crops.
We have. It's like we've uncovered a whole secret society living beneath our feet.
I know, right? And I'm definitely a cover crop convert now. But I want to shift gears a bit from theory to practice.
Okay, that's good.
What advice would you give someone who's ready to start using cover crops in their own garden or farm?
Well, the document emphasizes the importance of starting small.
Okay, start small.
Don't try to do too much at once. Pick a couple of cover crops that seem like a good fit for your soil and climate and just see how they do.
So like a cover crop test drive.
Exactly. Treat it as a learning experiment and make sure you take good notes.
Ah, yes, the importance of record keeping. It's so easy to forget what worked and what didn't.
I know. A garden journal or even just some simple notes can be a lifesaver. It helps you track your progress and make better decisions next time.
So start small, experiment, and keep good records. Got it. What other tips would you share?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. There are so many resources out there. Local extension agents, agricultural universities, online forums, you name it.
So many experts ready to share their knowledge.
Exactly. And attending workshops or field days can be incredibly helpful. Seeing cover crops in action is the best way to learn.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the benefits for soil health.
Yeah.
But do cover crops have a wider impact on the environment?
Definitely. They're like biodiversity boosters.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, above ground, flowering cover crops like buckwheat provide food for pollinators like bees and butterflies.
So they're helping those essential creatures thrive.
And below ground, they create a healthier habitat for all sorts of beneficial insects, earthworms, and microorganisms.
So it's like they're creating a ripple effect of good stuff throughout the ecosystem.
Exactly. It all comes back to that interconnectedness.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of cover crops, what are your thoughts on their future? Do you see them becoming even more important as we face challenges like climate change?
I do. Cover crops have so much potential to help us grow food more sustainably. They can help rebuild soil, conserve water, sequester carbon, you name it.
It's like they're holding the keys to a more resilient future for agriculture.
I think so. The more we learn about them, the more possibilities we unlock.
So what's the one key message you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
Simple. Embrace the power of cover crops. No matter what size garden or farm you have, there's a cover crop out there that can help you build healthier soil, support a thriving ecosystem, and create a more sustainable future.
Beautifully said. And I'd add, don't be afraid to get out there, experiment, and experience the magic of cover crops for yourself. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.